Good morning, everybody. This is Nicholas Peter, and I'm very excited about making this video for you guys. So, in a message to all kids in public school, one of my best videos that I've ever done, I describe a few of the government declassified documents that aren't taught in school. And so I actually have a lot of these things linked in my description of that video. And so if you scroll down just a little bit, under Escape of Hitler, you'll see that I have Operation Northwoods right here. And so I've already clicked on this one, and we're going to get into it. It's only a 15-page one, so I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. Make sure that I have this thing edited nice, so we have some pictures as well as I'm reading this thing, so you guys have a good idea about a good visualization of what I'm talking about as well. So we have the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Washington 23, D.C., 13th of March, 1962. So this is 56 years ago, almost 57 years ago. And this is an open known conspiracy that has happened in the government. So it's not far-fetched that they would be capable of doing another sort of conspiracy on a different subject. So the subject for this one is the justification of U.S. military intervention in Cuba. And then, so scroll down a little bit. So we got number one. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have considered the attached memorandum for the Chief of Operations, Cuba Project, which responds to a request of that office for brief but precise description of pretext, which would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. That's lovely. And then we have number two. The Joint Chiefs of Staff recommend that the proposed memorandum be forwarded as a preliminary submission suitable for planning purposes. It is assumed that there will be similar submissions from other agencies, and that these inputs will be used as a basis for developing a time-phased plan. Individual projects can then be considered on a case-by-case basis. So think about that. It's not just the Chiefs of Staff that have just conspired to come up with this kind of idea. They're bringing in other agencies as well and bringing in their ideas to collaborate, and then they can weed out the good ones and from the bad ones, and then create a nice plan from there. That's time sensitive, and they'll get into why it's time sensitive. So number three, further, it is assumed that a single agency will be given the primary responsibility for developing military and paramilitary aspects of the basic plan. It is recommended that this responsibility for both overt and covert military operations be assigned the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's L.L. Lemnitzer. He's the chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. So next page. This is the 12th of March. Note by the secretaries to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A report, with an asterisk, so that's not reproduced herewith, on file in Joint Secretariat. Okay. On the above subject is, a report on the above subject is submitted for consideration by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. F.J. Bluen and M.J. Angelito, Joint Secretariat. So this one's very hard to read, this page, but I'll try my best. Joint Chiefs of Staff, decision on JCS 1969/321, a note by the Secretaries on Northwoods. Note by the Secretaries. 1. At their meeting on 13th of March 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff approved the recommendations in paragraph 8 of JCS 1969/321. Number 2, in that Commandant had expressed direct concern for the Marine Corps in this matter. The provisions of Title 10 U.S. Code 141 (C) applied and were followed. Number 3, this decision now becomes a part and shall be attached as the top sheet of JCS 1969/321. And so we have the same two people, F.J. Bluen and M.J. Angelito, the Joint Secretariat. And so next page. So 9th of March 1962. It's a report by the Department of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff, representative on the Caribbean Survey Group, to the Joint Chiefs of Staff on Cuba Project. TS. I'm not sure what the TS means. The Chief of Operations, Cuba Project, has requested that he be furnished the views of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on this matter by the 13th of March, 1962. So they only had 4 days to do that. Once again, justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. They say that a bit in this document. The problem. Number 1. As requested by Chief of Operations, Cuba Project, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are to indicate brief but precise description of pretext which they would consider would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. So this one has an asterisk next to it, so let's look down a little. So the memorandum for General Craig from Chief of Operations, Cuba Project, subject, Operation Mongoose. And so I don't know what that is. That's something I haven't heard of before. So Operation Mongoose, dated the 5th of March, 1962. So this page was from the 9th, and they wanted, the deadline was for like the 13th for them to release something going. And it's on file in General Craig's office, so it's interesting. So Operation Mongoose, that's something I'm going to look up later on too. So facts bearing on the problem. Number 2, it is recognized that any action which becomes pretext for U.S. military intervention in Cuba will lead to a political decision, which then would lead to military action. Number 3, cognizance has been taken of a suggested course of action proposed, and there's some more asterisks, by the U.S. Navy relating to generated instances in Guantanamo area. God, say asterisk 5 times fast. So these two, so they're describing a memorandum for the chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, from Chief of Naval Operations. The subject is, quote, instances to provoke military actions in Cuba, end quote, dated the 8th of March, 1962, on file in General Craig's office. Okay. So cognizance has been taken of a suggested course of action proposed. So that was the 8th of March, they had proposed something by the U.S. Navy relating to generated instances in the Guantanamo area. So at least we know that the Navy's involved in this too. At what level, I'm not sure. I'm sure it's pretty high up there. I'm sure it's not the order followers, but the order givers. Number 4, for additional facts, see enclosure B. And then the discussion. Suggested courses of action appended to enclosure A. So the discussion. Number 5. The suggested courses of action appended to enclosure A are based on the premise that U.S. military intervention will result from a period of heightened U.S.-Cuban tensions, which place the United States in the position of suffering justifiable grievances. Oh my lord. World opinion and the United Nations Forum should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash and irresponsible, and as an alarming and unpredictable threat to the peace of the Western Hemisphere. So think about that for a second. So they're talking about the world's opinion. They want to shape the world's opinion, and the United Nations Forum should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash and irresponsible. So have they done that with other governments? So this is 1962. Think about it, have they done that with other governments in the past like 10 years or since then? I would like to think so. With Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Libya, it's plain as day. It's right here. They're talking about just developing a national image, international image of the Cuban government in a bad light, obviously. So yeah, the Cuban government may not be good anyway, but we're just gonna maybe heighten it and make it even worse, or make it a bigger thing than it actually is. So number 6, while the foregoing premise can be utilized at the present time, it will continue to hold good only as long as there can be reasonable certainty that U.S. military intervention in Cuba would not directly involve the Soviet Union. So this is where it gets a little bit deeper. That's why it's a time-phase plan, because they don't want it to involve the Soviet Union. So there is, next page, as yet no bilateral mutual support agreement binding the USSR to the defense of Cuba. Cuba has not yet become a member of the Warsaw Pact, nor have the Soviets established Soviet bases in Cuba in the pattern of U.S. bases in Western Europe. Therefore, since time appears to be an important factor in resolution of the Cuba problem, all projects are suggested within the time frame of the next few months. So that's why it's a time-phase plan. They have to have this in. You have to have it organized and make sure it's meticulously working and it makes sense and it's going to be able to be doable and be a success. But then also have it to where Cuba is not part of the Warsaw Pact by the time that this thing is happening, because otherwise the Soviets are going to be like liable to defend Cuba. So that's something that they have to be aware of and make sure that they get this accomplished before that happens, if it did happen. So that's something I could look into too. The Warsaw Pact, I've barely even heard about that, but now it makes sense what it is just from reading it in the context of that statement. So the conclusion, number 7, the suggested courses of action appended to enclosure A satisfactorily respond to the statement of the problem. However, these suggestions should be forwarded as a preliminary submission suitable for planning purposes, and together with similar inputs from other agencies provide a basis for development of a single integrated time phase plan to focus all efforts on the objective of justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. So we got the recommendations. Number 8, it is recommended that A, Enclosure A together with its attachments should be forwarded to the Secretary of Defense for approval and transmittal to the Chief of Operations Cuba Project. B, this paper not be forwarded to commanders of unified or specified commands. C, this paper not be forwarded to U.S. officers assigned to NATO activities. So NATO is the organization, I think it was after the Second World War, like a bunch of those European governments ended up having like a private military under the scenes that would be there just in case they get invaded. So that's like Gladio, Operation Gladio. I think NATO was part of that. And so they would have secret militaries just for defensive purposes. So D, this paper not be forwarded to the Chairman, U.S. Delegation, United Nations Military Staff Committee. Okay, so next page. So get that one out of the way. So memorandum for Chief of Operations, Cuba Project, justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Number 1, the reference is made to memorandum from Chief of Operations, Cuba Project for General Craig. The subject is Operation Mongoose, dated 5th of March 1962, which requested brief but precise description of pretext which the Joint Chiefs of Staff consider would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Number 2, the projects listed in the enclosure hereto are forwarded as a preliminary submission suitable for planning purposes. It is assumed that there will be similar submissions from other agencies and that these inputs will be used as a basis for developing a time phase plan. The individual projects can then be considered on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so that's a repeat again. Number 3, this plan, incorporating projects selected from the attached suggestions or from other sources, should be developed to focus all efforts on a specific ultimate objective which would provide adequate justification for U.S. military intervention. Such a plan would enable a logical buildup of incidents to be combined with other seemingly unrelated events to camouflage the ultimate objective and create the necessary impression of Cuban rashness and irresponsibility on a large scale. Directed at other countries as well as the United States, the plan would also properly integrate and time phase the courses of action to be pursued. The desired resultant So the plan would also properly integrate and time phase the courses of action to be pursued. The desired resultant from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government of Cuba and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. So let's just wrap our minds around that and just think about incidences that have happened in the past maybe 17 years, almost 18 years, where we have been looked at as a victim under justifiable and logical buildup of incidences over the course of maybe a decade or two prior, and then it leads to a single moment, and then we have a huge worldwide threat we have to watch out, and like it's going to threaten peace in that Western Hemisphere. Just think about it. Have we done that before in the recent decade or two? I think we have. And just looking at this declassified document that they thankfully didn't go through with, it's just a little concerning. And always just critically thinking, of course, is very important. And just I I always like to question the official narrative and even alternative narratives. Like, it's good to do the research, you know. It's not easy. It takes a little bit of work, but the time is worth it because then you can have tangible things to bring to other people when you talk about these things too. You have more files in your filing cabinet to be able to pull out when you need to, you know. And who knows, maybe you can even print out some of these documents and actually have them in a folder, literally. So this is just this paragraph itself, this number 3 is very, very important in this document. So number 4, time is an important factor in resolution of the Cuban problem, as they previously have stated. Therefore, the plan should be so time-phased that projects would be operable within the next few months. So these guys are definitely organized. So number 5, inasmuch as the ultimate objective is overt military intervention, so that's their ultimate objective, is the overt military intervention, it is recommended that primary responsibility for developing military and paramilitary aspects of the plan for both overt and covert military options be assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that ended up being a repeat, last half of that. And so just think about that. Think about the time, or the cash that they need for this, the fiat currency that they need for this to be developed, and especially when they go through some of the things that they can do. Just think about where this cash is coming from. They're either taking it from taxes, they're already stealing it from us via taxes, and then they're putting it towards this, or they're just printing it out of thin air to get it on credit, you know. So Annex to Appendix to Enclosure A. Pretext to justify U.S. military intervention in Cuba. So note, the courses of action which follow are preliminary submissions suitable only for planning purposes. They are arranged neither chronologically nor in ascending order. Together with similar inputs from other agencies, so we got to remember it's not just this one Chief of Staff branch that's doing it, it's other agencies. They are intended to provide a point of departure for the development of a single integrated time-phase plan. So this is just a jumping off point for them. Such a plan would permit the evaluation of individual projects within the context of cumulative, correlated actions designed to lead inexorably to the objective of adequate justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. So a nice logical buildup, a logical series of events to take place that would make sense to the normal population. So when they have the mass media from Operation Mockingbird, where they had CIA people in the media to bring out talking points and stuff, they'll be able to make news stories and have the progression throughout the weeks and the months of incidences that are happening and have it make logical sense for people. So that when it actually does occur, they're like, oh, okay, because that's because of this, and this happened, and this happened. But they can all be manufactured events. All of them. Or maybe all, or close to all of them. So that's something to keep in mind too, and even in this day and age, because these guys haven't changed their game strategy, you know? I'm sure they still do a lot of planning like this, because it only makes sense to do that.